Welcome to this next little video. And today what I'm going to do is give you some ideas about how you might go about learning to play a new piece. As an example, I'm going to use Sonata by Mozart. The first movement from his Sonata in C, which is the K545. And it's quite a useful piece to perhaps use for this exercise because it's one that pupils may often have a little go at playing when they perhaps get to grade 6-ish standard. I think the key thing is, when you're learning a new piece, is to try from the beginning not to make a mistake, which is in some ways easier said than done. But rather than going straight into the piece and trying to play it all the way through up to speed, and in which case you'll probably make quite a few mistakes, and those mistakes will remain in the memory, try to start off with practicing it slowly, writing and fingering and things, so that you make sure from the word go, you're learning it correctly and you're learning it with the right patterns and your brain will remember those. I guess if you want to, you could play it through, sight read it through once, just to get an idea of how the whole piece goes, but only the once. From then on, your practice needs to be slow and fairly detailed work. So, to begin with, I think the key thing is to work out the fingering. Sometimes this is where practicing it hands separately can be useful, but you'll need to go through it with a pencil and literally writing the fingering at every point where you need to put it in, where the fingering is not obvious. For example, when you get to bar 5 in this piece, you've got these scales in the right hand. And you'll have to work out a finger pattern to get round those. They're not quite the same as normal major scales because when they descend, they go down one extra note so that you get this kind of descending pattern of the scales gradually moving down the piano. When they come back in the recapitulation, it's slightly different because you've then got some flats in them. And you'll have to work out a fingering that will enable you to negotiate your way around those flats. Obviously, we try to avoid using the thumb on a black key whenever possible because it's slightly awkward to cross over. So go through it first of all, writing in the fingering. Most of that will be done as slow practice, a lot of hand-separate work. You might need to just check that the fingering will work, playing it up to speed if there's an awkward passage. Sometimes you might find a certain finger pattern will work at a slow tempo, but it may perhaps cause some difficulties when you do it up to speed. But once you've worked out the fingering that will work in that particular piece, stick with that fingering from then on. The next stage is to begin to practice the piece and start off playing at a speed at which you get everything accurate. Now that may start off really, really very slowly. You may end up playing at this speed as slowly as that, but make sure you practice at a speed you can play the whole piece through and it remains accurate, so you're learning the correct patterns. And it does take quite a lot of patience. It might need a metronome to help you keep at that steady speed, because if you're like me, you'll find the tendency is that you'll want to speed up gradually as you go through the piece. So you might need to use a metronome just to keep it at that very, very steady speed. You may find you want to practice a particular section of the piece first rather than tackling the whole movement. So you might do perhaps down to the end of bar 12 where you get the first kind of cadence. You might practice that section, doing it slowly several times. As you get more confident with it, you can then gradually pick the speed up. Either, if you're able to do it without the metronome if you want to, but the metronomes are very useful tools. Pick the speed up by, say, an interval of 5 or 10. Play it a couple of times at that speed. If you're able to play it accurately at that speed, speed it up by another 5 or 10, and until you gradually work it up to tempo. But if at any stage you find that it's starting to fall apart or little mistakes are creeping in, then slow the tempo back down so you're really practicing getting the accuracy there. As I said, you could work on a section at a time or you can do the whole piece. The advantage of doing a section at a time is that it's easier to perhaps memorise everything. If you're playing a whole piece through, by the time you get to the end, you'll have forgotten a lot of the details from the beginning. But if you practice a page or a section 3 or 4 times, you're more likely to remember that. So really the key thing is to do lots and lots of slow practice, which I know can be quite monotonous, takes a lot of time, but it really is the way to crack it. Eventually you will get it up to speed, And even when you've got it up to speed, you'll occasionally slow it down again to keep the accuracy there, keep it nice and tidy and neat, and keep the playing really secure. You then need to think as well about the interpretation. Obviously, you need to obey whatever markings the composer has given you on the score. That's your first thing. But then within that, there are also little nuances and colour that you can add. So, for example, a phrase might be marked MF, but that doesn't mean that within that phrase there shouldn't be perhaps a little bit of shape. Obviously, you need to bear in mind the period of music and the style of the composer as well. So, for example, if you're playing a piece of Beethoven, you would more or less stick exactly to what's on the page in terms of the dynamics. If you're playing a piece by, say, Chopin or a romantic composer, there's the opportunity to add a lot more rubato than perhaps you would with a piece by Mozart. There's the opportunity for a lot more shape to come through perhaps within each phrase than perhaps in a piece of Bach, which obviously would have originally been played on a harpsichord or clavichord, so would have had a limited dynamic range. It might be useful at this stage to listen to some recordings, but what I would say is don't copy a recording. Make it your performance and your interpretation. So if you do listen to a recording, use that for some inspiration, take some ideas perhaps from it, but try to listen to lots of different recordings and get a whole range of different ideas that you can then use to include in your own interpretation. Anyway, I hope that gives you some ideas. I'm sure you've got some other ideas as well, so do give me some comments, and thanks for all the feedback you have been giving, and let me know if there's any other kind of topics you'd like me to look at in these videos.